Caleb Turner had been riding since early morning, pushing his horse across the wide Arizona land that lay silent under a slowly setting sun. He was used to long rides and lonely days, and he never complained about them. Life on a ranch taught a man to stay steady, to keep moving, and to accept the quiet as a friend. But that evening, something felt different. The wind was warm, the sky turning gold, and there was a stillness that made his horse flick its ears nervously. Caleb didn't know why, but he felt he wasn't alone. He followed the narrow trail that curved around a dry wash and headed toward a small creek. Every time he came near water, he slowed down to check for cattle tracks or signs of travelers passing through. But today he heard something unusual, a weak rustling sound, like someone shifting on stones. At first, he thought it might be a deer or maybe a wild dog. But then he heard breathing heavy, tired breathing like someone trying not to cry out. Caleb stopped his horse and listened. The sound came from behind a large boulder near the creek. He stepped down, holding the reins lightly, and walked forward with slow steps. He didn't want to scare whoever or whatever was there. When he turned the corner of the rock, he froze for a moment. A young Apache girl sat on the ground, leaning against the stone, as if she had no strength left. She was tall, taller than most women Caleb had ever seen, and her shoulders were broad and strong, but her body looked weak from exhaustion. Dust covered her clothes, her long dark hair was tangled, and her lips looked dry as if she hadn't had water in days. Her eyes, large and tired, lifted slowly to look at him. Caleb felt a soft shock run through him. She looked like she had been through more than a person should bear. When she tried to speak, her voice cracked. She whispered, "I'm starving. For a man. A good man. Someone who won't hurt me." The words surprised Caleb, not because they sounded bold, but because of the pain behind them. Her voice trembled, and he understood she didn't mean anything improper. She meant she was starving for kindness, goodness, safety for someone who would treat her like a human being. It broke his heart a little that she had to phrase it that way, like she had given up hope of meeting a person she could trust. Caleb lowered himself to one knee so he wouldn't tower over her. "You're safe," he said gently. "I won't hurt you. Tell me what happened." The girl swallowed with difficulty. "My name is Nayeli," she whispered. I ran from bad men. They wanted to force me to work. I escaped, but I've been walking for days. I haven't eaten. I barely slept. I didn't think I would make it." Caleb's eyes softened as he listened. He could see her hands shaking lightly. Even though she was tall and strong, at that moment she looked more like a frightened child who had fought too long and too hard. "Do you have water?" he asked softly. She shook her head. Caleb didn't waste another second. He pulled his canteen from his belt, opened it, and held it near her lips. Nayeli hesitated, as if unsure whether she should trust him. Her eyes watched his face carefully. Something in his calm expression made her relax a little, and she drank slow, careful sips. Caleb didn't rush her. He waited patiently until she stopped. "Thank you," she breathed, closing her eyes for a moment. Caleb looked at her torn moccasins, the bruises on her arms, and the tired slump of her shoulders. She needed food, warmth, and rest. The nearest town was too far, and she wouldn't survive another night in the open. "I'm going to help you up," he said softly. "My horse can carry us both. I'll take you somewhere safe." Nayeli opened her eyes and studied him again. She was used to danger. She knew how to sense when someone meant harm. But this young rancher had a calm, honest face. No anger, no hunger, no intention to overpower her, only worry. She nodded weakly. Caleb slid an arm behind her back, careful not to startle her. She was taller than him by an inch, and heavier from muscle. But at that moment, she felt fragile, light, and unsteady. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Caleb reacted quickly. supporting her weight. "You haven't eaten in how many days?" he asked quietly. "3, maybe 4. I lost count," she whispered. He guided her slowly to his horse. The mare stood patiently as Caleb helped Nayeli onto the saddle. She sat with a tired sigh, gripping the saddle horn lightly. Caleb climbed up behind her, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't lean into him, but he could feel her exhaustion through every shaky breath she took. As they started riding toward his ranch, the sky turned from gold to purple. The first stars appeared overhead. The land around them grew quiet except for the soft rhythm of the horses' hooves. After a few minutes, Nayeli spoke again, her voice soft and uncertain. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Caleb looked at the horizon before answering. "My mother used to say that if someone is hurting and you're close enough to help, then it becomes your responsibility. She raised me that way." Nayeli didn't respond right away. She stared ahead, blinking several times, as if trying to hold back emotion. Finally, she whispered, "Then, your mother was a good woman." "She was," he said quietly. "She taught me to be a good man." Nayeli lowered her head slightly. "I've met many men," she whispered, "but not many good ones." Caleb didn't push her to explain more. He could tell she had seen things no one should see, lived through moments that marked her deeply. Tonight wasn't the night for heavy questions. Tonight was for safety. As they traveled, her voice grew softer, sometimes fading as if she drifted in and out of awareness. She rested one hand lightly against the horse's mane, trying to stay upright. Caleb kept the pace slow. The ride took more than an hour, but eventually the outline of Caleb's small ranch cabin appeared in the moonlight. Simple, quiet, and isolated. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney because he hadn't cooked yet. The corral fence creaked gently in the wind. Nayeli looked at the cabin with a faint expression of fear and hope mixed together. For a girl who had been running, any building, any walls, could feel both safe and dangerous. Caleb sensed this. "I'll keep the door open," he said softly. "You won't be trapped. You can leave any time. You're not my prisoner." The words seemed to ease her worries. She nodded slowly. When he helped her down from the horse, her legs nearly gave out again. Caleb steadied her without saying a word. She didn't pull away this time. She let him guide her gently into the cabin. Inside, he lit a lantern. The warm glow filled the room with soft light. The cabin had a simple table, a fireplace, a bed with a thick blanket, and a small shelf with a few books. Everything looked clean and well kept. Nayeli scanned the room carefully. Still alert, but no longer terrified. She sat where Caleb motioned her to sit on the edge of a chair near the fire. Caleb quickly warmed water and brought her a bowl of beans and bread he had prepared earlier. When she touched the bowl, her hands trembled again. She ate slowly at first, almost afraid to take too much. Caleb noticed. "You can eat all you want," he said gently. "There's more." She nodded timidly and took another bite. As she ate, her eyes softened, and her shoulders relaxed for the first time. She looked at him several times, almost studying him, as if she still couldn't believe someone was treating her kindly. After a few minutes, she whispered, "You're different from others." "How so?" Caleb asked with a small smile. "You don't look at me like I'm an animal or a problem," she said quietly. Caleb's expression softened. "Because you are." Those simple words made something inside Nayeli loosen, something that had been tied in fear for too long. She looked down, blinking fast, trying to control her emotions. When she finished eating, she sighed deeply, her whole body weary. Caleb pointed to the bed. "You can rest there. I'll sit by the fire. You don't have to worry." Nayeli hesitated but eventually stood and walked slowly to the bed. When she lay down, she pulled the blanket around her shoulders and closed her eyes. Before drifting into sleep, she whispered, barely audible, Thank you, young rancher. Tonight. Caleb looked at her from the other side of the room, feeling a quiet sense of responsibility settle in his heart. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. This girl had been through too much, and she deserved safety, and he would make sure she had it. Caleb woke up early the next morning, long before the sun pushed its first light over the hills. He had slept sitting in the old armchair near the fire, his hat tilted forward, his arms crossed loosely. The fire had died down to warm orange coals, and the cabin felt quiet, peaceful, in a way it hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, he simply sat still, listening to the soft breathing coming from the bed behind him. Nayeli was still asleep. She hadn't moved much during the night, except once, when she shifted and murmured something in her language, something soft and sad. Caleb hadn't understood a word, but the tone felt like someone calling for a family that would never answer again. He had stayed awake a little longer, just to make sure she rested. Now, in the stillness of dawn, he stood up slowly and stretched. He didn't want to wake her, so he stepped carefully to the door and slipped outside. Morning air in the desert carried a chill that clung to a man's skin. Caleb breathed it in deeply. His small ranch sat quiet under a pale blue sky, with the corral to the left and the fields stretching in every direction. The world felt wide again, but not empty. Not today. As he walked to tend the horse, he kept thinking about the girl sleeping inside his cabin. Nayeli. She had spoken her name in such a gentle voice the night before, almost like she didn't expect anyone to care enough to remember it. Caleb repeated it in his mind, letting the sound settle. She had been through something terrible. He didn't need details to understand that. What mattered now was helping her recover. He brushed down his horse, fed it hay, and checked the water barrel. Then he returned inside quietly. When he opened the door, the cabin filled with a bit of crisp morning air, and that soft breeze must have reached Nayeli. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked slowly, as if unsure where she was. Caleb spoke gently. "Morning, you're safe." Her eyes softened. "I slept?" "You did," he replied with a small smile. "Deep and peaceful. You needed it." She pushed herself up slowly, stretching her tired arms. She still looked worn, but not the same broken way she had yesterday. A night of warmth, food, and safety had already made a difference. For the first time, she looked around the cabin properly. "This is your home?" "It is," Caleb answered. "Small, but it does the job." She shook her head lightly. "No. It feels clean, calm, almost like someone cared about it." Caleb shrugged, a little shy. "I try." Nayeli sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you for letting me stay. I didn't think anyone would ever help me again." Caleb began preparing breakfast, talking over his shoulder so she wouldn't feel awkward. She let out a soft breath. "No," she said quietly. "Not anyone." He heard the pain in her words but didn't push her to explain. She had the right to tell her story when she was ready. As the smell of warm cornbread and beans filled the cabin, Nayeli's stomach made a small sound she tried to hide. Caleb pretended not to notice to save her pride. He set the food in front of her gently. "Eat slowly. Your body still needs time." She nodded and ate carefully, savoring each bite. As she did, her eyes kept drifting toward Caleb with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She wasn't used to this kind of treatment. That much was clear. When she finished breakfast, she stood with unsteady legs. Caleb stepped forward instinctively, ready to support her, but she lifted a hand with a faint smile. "I can stand," she said, though her voice was still soft. "That's good," Caleb replied, "but don't push yourself. You'll get dizzy." Nayeli looked at her feet, embarrassed. "I've always been strong," she admitted. "Stronger than most men. But after days of running, no food, no sleep, it feels like I am made of sand." Strength isn't just muscles, Caleb said. Strength is surviving when everything tries to break you. She looked up at him slowly, her dark eyes shining with something new respect. Caleb cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. If you'd like, you can sit outside for some fresh air. The sun's warm today. Nayeli wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and stepped outside with him. She looked at the open land, the quiet horizon, the distant hills. Her chest rose and fell slowly, like she was taking in something she had never seen before. This place, she whispered, does not feel dangerous. That's the point, Caleb said. I built it to be peaceful. She sat on the porch, warming her hands in the sunlight. Caleb grabbed a few buckets and headed toward the well. While working, he noticed Nayeli watching him carefully at first. Then, more openly. When he finished carrying water back, she finally spoke. You work alone here? I do, he answered. Lost my parents a few years back. Never had brothers. Just me and the land. That must be lonely. Caleb shrugged. Sometimes. But the quiet can be good. It teaches a man who he is. She nodded slowly. I understand that. I lived alone too. In the mountains. Sometimes hiding for months. Silence was the only friend I had. Her words weren't dramatic, they were simple, honest, and heavy. Caleb placed the water bucket down and sat on the porch, railing a few feet away from her. You don't have to tell me everything now, he said. But if you ever want to talk, I'll listen. Nayeli lowered her gaze. Her voice trembled when she whispered. People used to speak to me like I wasn't worth hearing. You speak gently. I don't know any other way, Caleb said. For a while they sat quietly, letting the warm morning settle around them. Birds chirped in the nearby mesquite trees. The wind brought the smell of dry grass and sunshine. It felt like the world was giving Nayeli a small gift, a moment without fear. After some time, Nayeli asked softly, Can I help with something? I don't want to sit and do nothing while you work. Caleb shook his head. You're recovering. That's enough. But she looked determined. Let me at least try. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. Something light. One. He showed her how to sort the small pile of tools near the barn. It wasn't heavy work, but it helped her feel useful. Though her hands shook at first, she focused carefully on the task. Caleb watched quietly, admiring how even simple work seemed to restore a bit of confidence in her. After a while, she sat down, breathing hard. See, Caleb said gently, you need more rest. She managed a small smile. I know, but I wanted to feel normal. Caleb brought her a cup of cool water. You'll get stronger every day. Nayeli drank slowly, then looked at him with a new, steady expression. You're not scared of me. Why would I be? Caleb asked. She looked down at her tall frame, her broad shoulders. Because I am not small, like other women. People stared at me, laughed sometimes, said unkind things. Some men were afraid I might fight them. Caleb shook his head. I don't see anything wrong with being strong. A person's worth isn't in size. It's in heart. She took in his words with a quiet breath, almost like she was storing them inside, saving them for later. By midday, the sun rose high and bright. Caleb suggested they go back inside to rest. Nayeli followed him, moving a little easier than before. Inside the cabin, she sat back on the chair while he prepared some soup. When he handed her the bowl, she looked at it with a strange expression. What is it? He asked. My mother used to make soup like this, she whispered. I haven't smelled it in years. Caleb sat across from her. Tell me about her, if you want. Nayeli hesitated, her eyes softened with old sadness. She was gentle. She taught me to smile. But everything changed after she passed. The world turned colder. Caleb listened quietly. After a long moment, she continued. When I said yesterday, that I was starving for a man. I meant I was starving for someone good. Someone who doesn't shout, or hit, or take. Someone who sees me as human. Caleb nodded. I understood that. She looked at him with something close to gratitude. You are the first man in a long time who made me feel safe. Caleb wasn't used to such direct honesty. He lowered his gaze briefly, then answered softly. I'm glad I could help, and you're safe here. Truly. Nayeli relaxed into the chair, letting warmth from the food and the fire settle into her bones. As she rested, Caleb cleaned up quietly, giving her space. Outside, the afternoon wind blew softly across the land. Inside, calm wrapped around them like a blanket. After a while, Nayeli spoke again, almost in a shy whisper. Yes? Do you think a person who has suffered too much can still find a place to belong? Caleb set down the dish he was drying. His voice came out steady and certain. Yes. I think sometimes the people who suffer the most deserve a peaceful life more than anyone. She breathed out slowly, deeply, as if those words had been needed for years. When the sun began to set, the cabin glowed again with gentle light. Nayeli sat beside the fire, gazing into the flames. Caleb sat nearby, whittling a small piece of wood into a smooth shape. After a long pause, she said quietly, I don't feel scared anymore. Caleb met her gaze. Good. That's how it should be. She nodded, eyes soft, shoulders relaxed. For the first time, she looked like someone who believed the world could be kind again. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew this was only the beginning of something deeper, trust, healing, and perhaps a bond that neither had expected. But for now, the peace of this evening was enough. Caleb woke before sunrise on the third morning, but something felt different the moment he opened his eyes. The cabin, usually peaceful at dawn, felt tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. He sat up slowly, listening. The fire had burned low, but its soft crackling wasn't what made his heart tighten. It was the quiet, shifting noise coming from outside. He stood and walked to the window, moving slowly so he didn't wake Nayeli. She was still asleep on the bed, her breathing calm and steady, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her face looked more peaceful than it had the first day, but there was still a shadow of fear around her eyes, the kind that doesn't disappear after only 2 nights of safety. Caleb pushed the curtain aside slightly and glanced out. Nothing moved, not the grass, not the trees, not the barn door. But he knew something wasn't right. Years of ranch life had taught him to sense danger even when he couldn't see it. He stepped outside quietly, closing the door so Nayeli wouldn't grow alarmed. The morning sky was gray with thin clouds, and the air felt heavy with the promise of heat later. Caleb walked around the cabin, checking the ground for unusual tracks. Near the edge of the property, beside the corral, he spotted something that didn't belong there. Boot prints. Fresh ones. His heart tightened. Someone had been there early, maybe even before dawn. The direction of the tracks showed they came from the west and stopped near the trees. Whoever it was didn't enter the ranch, but they watched. Caleb followed the prints a few steps but stopped. He knew wandering far would be unsafe with Nayeli inside. He turned back and walked quickly to the cabin, trying to keep calm. Inside, Nayeli was sitting up, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. She looked like she hadn't slept well. I heard something, she whispered. Is everything all right? Caleb didn't lie. She deserved honesty. Someone was near the ranch. I saw tracks. Her eyes widened slightly, and she pulled the blanket closer. They found me. Maybe, Caleb said gently, but you're safe here. She shook her head. They won't stop. They always find whoever escapes. That. Caleb crouched near her so she wouldn't feel small or cornered. I won't let anyone take you. Not while you're under my roof. Clyde. Nayeli breathed out shakily, trying to control her fear. You don't understand. These men, they're not like normal people. They don't care about kindness or laws. They take what they want. I know the type, Caleb replied calmly. I've dealt with them before. She stared at him, searching his eyes for any sign of uncertainty. But Caleb's quiet confidence seemed to calm her a little. After breakfast, she insisted on helping him outside despite the tension in the air. Caleb didn't argue much. Keeping her busy would prevent her mind from overthinking. She helped sweep the porch and feed the chickens. Her movements were slow but determined. But even with work to distract her, her eyes kept flicking toward the trees. By midday, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of horses in the distance. Caleb heard it first, but Nayeli's head snapped toward the sound only a second later. Her shoulders stiffened, her breath caught. They're coming, she whispered. I know that sound. They ride fast, like hunters. Caleb placed a steady hand on her arm. Go inside. Stay low. Don't come out until I say. Nayeli hesitated. She didn't want to hide again, not after finding a place where she felt human. But she also trusted Caleb. That trust made her step backward toward the cabin door. Caleb walked out to the open yard, his posture calm, his breath steady. He stood tall, not aggressive, but not fearful either. A man could show strength without lifting a weapon. Minutes later, 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Their horses kicked up dust as they approached. The men on them looked rough, dusty coats, unshaven faces, and eyes that held a cruel sharpness. Caleb didn't need introductions to know they were trouble. The one in front, with a scar across his cheek, called out, We're looking for an Apache girl. Tall one. Strong one. Heard she ran through this area. Caleb didn't flinch. Why would you think she's here? Scarface grinned. Tracks lead toward your ranch. Simple as that. Caleb shrugged slightly. Plenty of people pass by these parts. The second man leaned forward in his saddle. She escaped from us. She belongs with our group. Belongs, Caleb repeated, his voice even. A person doesn't belong to anyone. The men exchanged glances. Some of them chuckled coldly. Boy, Scarface said, if you're hiding her, it'll go worse for you. Caleb didn't move an inch. There's no one here who belongs to you. Inside the cabin, Nayeli stood behind the curtain, trembling. She wanted to run, but she also wanted to trust Caleb's promise. Her heart pounded as she watched the men glare at him. Scarface spat on the ground. We'll search your land. Caleb shook his head. No, you won't. One of the men placed his hand near his holster, but Caleb remained still. His calm made the men pause. Something about the way he stood told them he wasn't afraid. Leave, Caleb said firmly. There's nothing for you here. Scarface glared long and hard. This ain't over, rancher. Then he jerked the reins and rode off. His men following. They didn't look satisfied. They would come back. Caleb waited until the riders disappeared over the hill before going inside. Nayeli rushed to him. Her breaths uneven. You shouldn't have faced them alone, she said, voice shaking. You shouldn't have to face them at all. Caleb replied. She sat down on the chair, burying her face in her hands. They won't stop now. They know I'm close. They'll return when they think you're weaker. Caleb knelt beside her. Listen to me. You're not running anymore. Not from them. Not from anyone. Nayeli looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. Why do you care so much? You don't even know me. Caleb exhaled slowly. Because you didn't deserve what happened. Because no one has ever protected you. Because you asked for help. And I heard you. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She had cried too much in her life already. Those men won't get past the community around here, Caleb continued. My neighbors know me. They know I don't ask for help unless it's serious. You think others will help you protect me? she whispered. I know they will. That afternoon, Caleb saddled his horse and rode to the nearest ranch. His closest neighbor, Thomas Brewer, was a calm, steady man with a big family and a protective heart. Caleb explained the situation in simple words, without revealing details about Nayeli's suffering. Brewer didn't hesitate. You did right bringing her in. We'll keep watch for those men. By sunset, 5 neighboring ranchers had agreed to help. Some left their sons to stay on Caleb's land overnight. They didn't come to fight, they came to stand. Quiet strength was enough. When Caleb returned to the cabin, Nayeli was sitting by the fire, her hands folded tightly, her eyes nervous. When she saw him, she stood immediately. Are they coming back tonight? She asked. Not tonight, Caleb answered. And if they do, we're ready. Nayeli walked toward him slowly, unsure of her steps. She looked up at him, her tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. No one has ever stood for me before, she whispered. I didn't know men like you existed. Caleb looked into her eyes that had carried too much grief for someone so young. You deserve help, he said softly. You deserve peace. And you deserve people who care. Nayeli's breath shook slightly, like her heart wasn't used to hearing such words. As night settled, she sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket. Caleb sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. The stars above them glimmered quietly, and the wind carried the faint smell of sage. After a long moment, Nayeli said softly. Caleb turned his head slightly. Why not? Because I'm not alone now, she whispered. Because you made me believe good people exist. The fire inside the cabin glowed through the open door, warm and inviting. Outside, the moon rose high, lighting the land with a silver glow. And for the first time in many years, Nayeli felt something new, something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. The night after the men rode away was long and heavy. Caleb stayed awake beside the window, keeping the lantern low so its light didn't travel far. Outside, the land lay silent under the moon, and the figures of Brewer's sons could be seen in the distance. 2 of them sitting quietly near the corral, another on horseback, circling the far fence line. They were there to help. Not because Caleb asked, but because ranchers looked after each other in these parts. Kindness ran like a hidden river beneath the dry land. Inside, the cabin glowed with soft warmth. Nayeli sat on the chair by the fireplace, wrapped in the blanket, watching the flames flicker. She had not spoken much since sunset. Fear still pressed on her mind. But there was something else, too. A strange comfort she couldn't hide. Every few minutes, she glanced toward Caleb, as if checking to be sure he was still there. He always was. When the fire dimmed and the room grew quiet, Nayeli spoke softly. Caleb, why did they want me back? Why do they chase me? Caleb kept his voice gentle so it wouldn't sound like a demand. Only tell me. If you want to. Nayeli stared into the fire. Her hands were folded tightly, but her voice stayed steady. Those men. They forced people to work for them. Sometimes they make them gather firewood, sometimes cook, sometimes clean their camp. If someone tries to run, they chase them. Like animals. She swallowed hard. I ran because I didn't want to spend my whole life under them. I wanted freedom. I wanted to feel like a person again. Caleb nodded slowly. You were brave to escape. She shook her head. I was desperate. Caleb didn't argue. He understood how survival could look both brave and desperate at the same time. After a long silence, Nayeli whispered, You keep telling me I'm safe here. And I want to believe it. But I'm scared they'll come back stronger. They always come back. Caleb walked over and knelt beside her chair, not too close, not touching, just close enough so she didn't feel alone. Then we'll face them again, he said calmly. But you're not alone anymore. That changes everything. She looked into his eyes, searching again for any sign of weakness in his words. She found none. That quiet strength in him made her heart steady. Hours passed. Caleb finally urged her to rest. Sleep, he said gently. I'll be right here. And she lay down on the bed and slowly drifted off. Her mind still heavy, but calmer. Caleb remained awake, listening to her breathing, watching the door, and hoping the danger had passed. When morning finally came, the sky stretched wide and bright above the land. The night's tension seemed to melt with the sunrise. Brewers' sons returned to their ranches, promising to come back if needed. Caleb thanked them one by one, grateful for their loyalty. Inside, Nayeli awoke to a peaceful cabin. She stood, stretched carefully, then stepped outside into the morning air. Caleb was tending the horse, his sleeves rolled up, his face calm but tired from lack of sleep. When she approached, he turned and smiled softly. "You slept well," he said. "I did," she replied. For the first time in many months. Her smile was small but honest. That small smile warmed Caleb more than the rising sun. They shared breakfast together, and for a moment it felt almost normal, two people talking quietly over beans and warm bread. Yet beneath that quiet, something deeper was forming. Trust. Respect. A bond strong enough to carry the weight of fear and uncertainty. Later that day, the ranch grew lively again with work. Caleb repaired a broken fence post, and Nayeli helped carry light tools. She still lacked full strength, but every movement came with determination. She wanted to show she wasn't a burden. At one point, Caleb noticed her breathing hard and said gently, "You need to rest." She shook her head stubbornly. "I want to help." "You already are," he answered. "You staying safe, that alone is worth something." Her eyes softened at those words. As the afternoon sun burned high, a rider appeared in the distance, a sheriff from town. Caleb stepped forward to meet him, while Nayeli stood near the porch, her body tense. The sheriff dismounted and greeted Caleb with a nod. "Heard some trouble passed through yesterday." Caleb explained the situation, not every detail, but enough for the sheriff to understand the seriousness. The sheriff listened closely and then said, "Those men have caused trouble in 2 other areas. If they return, I'll handle it." Nayeli watched from a distance, her heart pounding. When the sheriff noticed her, he gave a gentle nod. "You're safe here, miss. No one's taking you anywhere." She nodded back, her eyes grateful but uncertain. After the sheriff left, she turned to Caleb. "Do you think he meant it?" "I do," Caleb replied. "He's a good man. You can trust him." Nayeli looked down. "I only trust a few people in this world." Caleb smiled softly. "That's all right. Trust should be earned, not given." The rest of the day passed peacefully. Nayeli helped gather kindling. Caleb chopped wood. The land felt quiet, and the shadows growing long across the fields looked gentle instead of threatening. As evening approached, Nayeli stood outside watching the sunset. Caleb stood beside her, keeping a respectful space. She broke the silence with a small question. "Why do you help me so much?" Caleb looked at the horizon before answering. "Because someone needed to, and because you remind me of what my mother always taught me. Kindness is never wasted, especially on someone who's hurting." Nayeli's eyes glistened. She turned her face slightly away so Caleb wouldn't see her emotion. But he noticed anyway. "You think I deserve kindness?" she whispered. "Yes, more than you know." She took a slow breath. "I was beginning to believe the opposite." Caleb shook his head. "Not anymore." A soft wind brushed through the grass. The sky faded into deep orange and then purple. It was the kind of sunset that made a person feel things they didn't have names for. Nayeli spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "Caleb, when I first saw you by the creek, I thought maybe you were just another man who would hurt me. But you didn't. You treated me gently." You didn't look at me with fear or anger. You treated me like—" She paused, trying to find the words. "Like, I matter." Caleb's voice came out low and steady. "You do matter." She turned toward him slowly. Her tall, strong frame stood in the fading light. Yet she looked soft and almost shy. "When I said, 'I'm starving for a man that day,'" she said quietly, "I meant I was starving for goodness. For someone true. I didn't think anyone like that still existed." Caleb didn't speak right away. He just looked at her with the same calm strength he always carried. Then he said, Nayeli's breath shook. "I know." They stood together in silence for a while, watching the sky darken. The first stars appeared overhead, and the night air cooled. Caleb went inside to light the fire, and Nayeli followed slowly, feeling the cabin already becoming like a second skin, a place that felt familiar, warm, and comforting. Inside, she sat near the fire. Caleb placed a mug of warm tea in her hands. She took a sip and whispered, "This feels like a home." Caleb sat across from her, his voice soft. "It can be, for as long as you need." Her eyes widened slightly. "You would allow me to stay?" "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "But if you want to stay, you're welcome here." Nayeli looked into the fire, her face glowing with a soft light. She wasn't used to being wanted anywhere. She wasn't used to safety, warmth, or gentle voices. Yet here she was, offered all three without condition. Finally, she lifted her gaze to Caleb. A new steadiness had entered her eyes, something stronger than fear. "Then I will stay," she said. "Not because I'm hiding." Caleb nodded, a quiet warmth in his chest. "I'm glad." She smiled, small, gentle, real. A young rancher and a once hunted Apache girl, standing on the same ground, sharing the same fire, building something soft and strong between them. A new beginning had taken root, not in grand words or dramatic promises, but in safety, in trust, in the simple, honest truth that neither of them was alone anymore. And for Nayeli, who had run from shadows for too long, that truth was enough to change her entire world.